Bernard "Bernie" Sanders is an American politician and the junior United States Senator from Vermont. Before serving in the Senate, he represented Vermont's at-large congressional district in the United States House of Representatives and served as mayor of Burlington, the largest city in Vermont. Sanders is a self-described democratic socialist, and has praised Scandinavian-style social democracy. Sanders caucuses with the Democratic Party and is counted as a Democrat for the purposes of committee assignments, but because he does not belong to a formal political party, he appears as an independent on the ballot. He was also the only independent member of the House during most of his service and is the longest-serving independent in U.S. congressional history. In an interview with The Nation on March 6, 2014, Sanders stated that he is prepared to run for President of the United States in 2016. Early life and education: Sanders was born on September 8, 1941, in Brooklyn, New York, the son of Polish-Jewish immigrants, Dorothy and Eli Sanders. He attended James Madison High School in Brooklyn, where he ran for his school's track team and from which he graduated in 1959. Sanders spent a year studying psychology at Brooklyn College before transferring to the University of Chicago. While a student in 1963, Sanders was active in the civil rights movement, becoming a student organizer for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. He was one of several thousand students who traveled on buses to Washington, D.C., for the 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. Sanders graduated from the University of Chicago in 1964 with a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science. After graduating, Sanders spent time on an Israeli kibbutz, an experience that shaped his political views. In 1964, he moved to Vermont, where he worked as a carpenter, filmmaker, writer, and researcher, among other jobs. Early political career: Liberty Union. Sanders' political career began in 1971 when he joined the anti-Vietnam War Liberty Union Party in Vermont. Thereafter he ran in and lost several elections, including for the U.S. Senate in 1972 and 1974, and for governor of Vermont in 1972 and 1976. In 1979, Sanders resigned from the LU and worked as a writer and the director of the non-profit American People's Historical Society. Mayor of Burlington, in 1981, at the suggestion of his friend Richard Sugarman, a professor of religion at the University of Vermont, Sanders ran for mayor of Burlington and defeated six-term Democratic incumbent Gordon Paquette by 14 votes in a four-way contest. Sanders won 3 more terms, defeating both Democratic and Republican candidates. In his final run for mayor in 1987, Sanders defeated a candidate endorsed by both major parties. During Sanders' first term, his supporters, including the First Citizens Party city councilor Terry Bouricius, formed the Progressive Coalition, the forerunner of the Vermont Progressive Party. The Progressives never held more than 6 seats on the 13-member city council but held enough votes to keep the council from overriding Sanders' vetoes. Under Sanders, Burlington became the first city in the country to fund community trust housing. His administration also sued the local cable television provider and won considerably reduced rates and a substantial cash settlement. After serving 4 terms, Sanders chose not to seek re-election in 1989, and went on to teach political science briefly at Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government in 1989 and Hamilton College in 1991. U.S. House of Representatives elections: in 1988, incumbent Republican Congressman Jim Jeffords decided to run for the U.S. Senate, vacating Vermont's at-large congressional district. Republican Lieutenant Governor Peter Smith won the House election with a plurality of 41% of the vote. Sanders, who ran as an independent, placed second with 38% of the vote, while Democrat State Representative Paul N. Poirier placed third with 19% of the vote. In 1990, Sanders ran for the seat again and defeated Smith in a rematch, 56% to 40%. Sanders became the first independent elected to the U.S. House of Representatives in 40 years, since Frazier Reams of Ohio. Thereafter Sanders continually won re-election with high margins, with his closest bid in 1994 during the Republican Revolution, when he won just 50% of the vote. Tenure: in 1991, Sanders co-founded the Congressional Progressive Caucus, and chaired the grouping of mostly liberal Democrats for its first 8 years. In 1993, Sanders voted for a National Rifle Association-supported bill to restrict lawsuits against gun manufacturers and against the Brady Bill. Upon the resignation of Democrat Ron Dellums in 1998, Sanders became the only congressman to describe himself as a socialist. Sanders voted against the resolutions authorizing the use of force against Iraq in 1991 and 2002, and opposed the 2003 invasion of Iraq. He later joined his colleagues in voting for a non-binding resolution expressing support for troops at the outset of the invasion, but gave a floor speech criticizing the partisan nature of the resolution, and the George W. Bush administration's actions in the run-up to the war. On April 7, 2006, in regard to the investigation of what turned out to be a leak of CIA agent Valerie Plame's identity by a Pentagon official, Sanders said, "The revelation that the president authorized the release of classified information in order to discredit an Iraq war critic should tell every member of Congress that the time is now for a serious investigation of how we got into the war in Iraq and why Congress can no longer act as a rubber stamp for the president." In June 2005, Sanders proposed an amendment to limit provisions that allow the government to obtain individuals' library and book buying records. The amendment passed the House by a bipartisan majority but was removed on November 4 that year in House-Senate negotiations and never became law. Sanders followed this vote on November 5, 2005, by voting against the Online Freedom of Speech Act, which would have exempted the Internet from the restrictions of the McCain-Feingold bill. In March 2006, after a series of resolutions calling for him to bring articles of impeachment against the president passed in various towns in Vermont, Sanders stated it would be impractical to impeach George W. Bush, given the reality that the Republicans control the House and the Senate. Still, Sanders made no secret of his opposition to the Bush administration, which he regularly attacked for cuts to social programs he supports. Sanders was a critic of Alan Greenspan. In June 2003, during a question-and-answer discussion with the then Federal Reserve Chairman, Sanders told Greenspan that he was concerned that Greenspan was way out of touch, and that "you see your major function in your position as the need to represent the wealthy and large corporations." Sanders said in 1998 that investment banks and commercial banks should remain as separate entities. Republicans have attacked Sanders as an ineffective extremist for successfully sponsoring only one law and 15 amendments in his 8 terms in the House. Sanders responded by saying that he had passed the most floor amendments of any member of the House since 1996. U.S. Senate elections. Sanders had mentioned on several occasions that he would run for the Senate if Jeffords were to retire, and after Jeffords's announcement that he would not seek a 4th term, Sanders entered the race on April 21, 2005. New York Senator Chuck Schumer, the chairman of the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, endorsed Sanders, a critical move, as it meant that no Democrat running against Sanders could expect to receive financial help from the party. Sanders was also endorsed by Senate Minority Leader Harry Reid of Nevada, and Democratic National Committee Chairman and former Vermont Governor Howard Dean. Dean said in May 2005 that he considered Sanders an ally who votes with the Democrats 98% of the time. Then Senator Barack Obama also campaigned for Sanders in Vermont. Sanders entered into an agreement with the Democratic Party, much as he had as a congressman, to be listed in their primary but to decline the nomination should he win, which he did. In the most expensive political campaign in Vermont's history, Sanders defeated businessman Rich Tarrant by an approximately 2-to-1 margin. Many national media outlets projected Sanders the winner before any returns came in. Sanders was re-elected in 2012 with 71% of the vote. Tenure. Polling conducted in August 2011 by Public Policy Polling found that Sanders' approval rating was 67% and his disapproval rating 28%, making him then the 3rd most popular senator in the country. Sanders has an agreement with the Democratic leadership in the Senate under which he votes with the Democrats on all procedural matters except with permission of Democratic Whip Dick Durbin a request which is rarely made or granted in exchange for the committee seats and seniority that would be available to him as a Democrat. He is free to vote as he pleases on policy matters, but almost always votes with the Democrats. Environment. Sanders and Senator Barbara Boxer introduced the Global Warming Pollution Reduction Act of 2007 on January 15, 2007. The measure would have provided funding for research and development on geologic sequestration of carbon dioxide, set emissions standards for new vehicles and a renewable fuels requirement for gasoline beginning in 2016, established energy efficiency and renewable portfolio standards beginning in 2008 and low-carbon electric generation standards beginning in 2016 for electric utilities, and would have required periodic evaluations by the National Academy of Sciences to determine whether emissions targets are adequate. Sanders is a vocal advocate about the ramifications of global warming. In a speech on the Senate floor on July 26, 2012, Sanders addressed claims made by fellow Senator Jim Inhofe. The bottom line is when Senator Inhofe says global warming is a hoax, he is just dead wrong, according to the vast majority of climate scientists. Following the 2011 Japanese nuclear accidents, Sanders called for a moratorium on the licensing of new nuclear plants and relicensing of existing ones, in an effort to slow down what's been touted as a nuclear renaissance in the United States. Sanders wrote to President Barack Obama asking for him to appoint a special commission to review the safety of U.S. nuclear plants. Sanders also wants to repeal a federal law that he says leaves the taxpayers to pick up most of the costs of a major nuclear accident. He says, in a free enterprise system, the nuclear industry should be required to insure itself against accidents. Public disclosure and transparency. Sanders supports the Disclose Act, which would make campaign finances more transparent and ban U.S. corporations controlled by foreign interests from making political expenditures. Media reform. Sanders has been a leader in calling for media reform and opposes increased concentration of ownership of media outlets, as well as being a contributing author for op-ed news. He appeared in oral roles in his Grave and Outfoxed, Rupert Murdoch's War on Journalism, 2 documentaries on the subject. Rights. Sanders is a staunch supporter of a universal healthcare system, and has said if you are serious about real healthcare reform, the only way to go is single-payer. Sanders is a social liberal, supporting LGBT rights, same-sex marriage, and pro-choice legislation. In the House he voted against the Defense of Marriage Act. Budget. On September 24, 2008, Senator Sanders posted on his website a letter to Treasury Secretary Henry Paulson, against the initial bailout proposal, drawing more than 8,000 citizen co-signers in the first 24 hours. On January 26, 2009, Sanders and Democrats Robert Byrd, Russ Feingold and Tom Harkin were the sole majority members to vote against confirmation of Timothy Geithner to be United States Secretary of the Treasury. On December 10, 2010, Sanders delivered an 8.5-hour speech against the Tax Relief, Unemployment Insurance Reauthorization, and Job Creation Act of 2010, the proposed extension of the Bush-era tax rates that eventually became law, saying enough is enough. How many homes can you own? A long speech such as this is traditionally a filibuster, but because it didn't block action, it isn't technically a filibuster under Senate rules. National acclaim. On January 19, 2011, Sanders announced that his filibuster speech would be published in February 2011 by Nation Books as The Speech, a historic filibuster on corporate greed and the decline of our middle class, with authorial proceeds going to Vermont non-profit charitable organizations. In response to his filibuster, activists across the country started talking up the notion of a Sanders for president run in 2012 either as a dissident Democrat in the primaries or as a left-leaning independent. Hundreds of people signed online petitions urging Sanders to run, and pollsters began measuring his support in key primary states. Progressive activists such as Rabbi Michael Lerner and economist David Korten publicly voiced their support for a prospective Sanders run against President Barack Obama. At that time, Sanders disavowed any interest in a presidential run, saying he was very proud to be Vermont senator, and maintaining that "I am very content to be where I am, but I am flattered by that kind of response." But Sanders has shown openness to running for president in 2016, and as of May 2014 has been making public appearances in various states, as is typical of potential candidates. 2013 U.S. Government Shutdown, Committee Assignments, Committee on the Budget, Committee on Veterans Affairs, Committee on Environment and Public Works, Subcommittee on Clean Air and Nuclear Safety, Subcommittee on Green Jobs and the New Economy, Subcommittee on Transportation and Infrastructure, Committee on Energy and Natural Resources, Subcommittee on Energy, Subcommittee on National Parks, Subcommittee on Water and Power, Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions, Subcommittee on Children and Families, Subcommittee on Primary Health and Aging. Sponsored legislation. Sanders introduced the Veterans Compensation Cost of Living Adjustment Act of 2013 into the Senate on May 8, 2013. The bill would increase the disability compensation rate for American veterans and their families. Sanders co-wrote, with Senator John McCain, the Veterans Access to Care Through Choice, Accountability, and Transparency Act of 2014, a bill intended to reform the United States Department of Veterans Affairs in response to the Veterans Health Administration scandal of 2014. HIV/AIDS advocates have praised Sanders for a bill he introduced in 2012 that aimed to lower the cost of prescription drugs for HIV patients. Possible 2016 presidential run. In a March 6, 2014 interview with The Nation, Sanders stated that he is prepared to run for President of the United States in 2016 but did not officially announce a campaign. When pressed on the issue, Sanders said, "If the question is am I actively right now organizing and raising money and so forth for a campaign for president, I'm not doing that. On the other hand, am I talking to people around the country? Yes, I am. Will I be doing some traveling around the country? Yes, I will be. But I think it unregistered trademark is premature to be talking about a campaign when we still have a 2014 congressional race in front of us." Personal life. Sanders is married to Jane Amiara Driscoll, a former president of Burlington College. He has one child and 3 stepchildren. His brother, Larry Sanders, was a Green Party county councillor representing the East Oxford division on Oxfordshire County Council, in England, until his retirement in 2013. Sanders is one of 2 sitting U.S. senators who went to James Madison High School in Brooklyn, the other being Chuck Schumer. Before Sanders became a member of the U.S. House of Representatives, his roommate was Richard I. Sugarman, a professor at the University of Vermont. Coincidentally, Senator Joseph Lieberman, for much of the time the only other independent serving in the Senate, shared a suite with Sugarman when the two attended Yale University in the 1960s. For the Friday segment Brunch with Bernie of the Thom Hartmann radio program, Hartmann interviews Sanders and the senator answers listeners' calls. Electoral history. Footnotes. Further reading, Tom W. Rice, Who Votes for a Socialist Mayor? The Case of Burlington, Vermont, Polity, Volume 17, No. 4, ppA 795 a 806. In JSTOR, Stephen Rosenfeld, Making History in Vermont, The Election of a Socialist to Congress, Wakefield, New Hampshire, Hollowbrook Publishing, 1992. Stephen Seufer, The Socialist Mayor, Bernard Sanders in Burlington, Vermont, Westport, Connecticut, Bergen and Garvey, 1991. Biography at the Biographical Directory of the United States Congress, Profile at Project Vote Smart, Financial Information at the Federal Election Commission, Legislation sponsored at the Library of Congress, External links, Official U.S. Senate site, Official Facebook page, Official Twitter account, Official YouTube channel, Bernie Sanders at DMOZ, Friends of Bernie Sanders, a campaign site.